Before we get into tonight's stories, I want to say something. Every account you're about to hear was sent in anonymously, and every single one is told from the side of the story we don't usually get to hear. The person doing the bad thing, not the person it happened to. These aren't redemption stories. Some of these people never really changed, but all of them got a taste of something they didn't expect, and that's why they're finally talking. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been with us a while, you already know the drill. Settle in, dim the lights if you've got the nerve, and remember that every single one of these was submitted to us directly by the person who lived it. We don't verify these stories. We can't. All we can do is pass them along exactly as they were written to us, and let you decide what you believe. Let's start with the first letter. I won't pretend I'm a good person. I never really was, not back then. I grew up rough, made bad choices, and for a long stretch of my life, I leaned into being bad instead of fighting it. I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for me. I just want that on the table before I tell you what happened to me almost 20 years ago, because you're going to need the full picture to understand why I nearly didn't walk away from it. In the early 2000s, I was living out of my car, drifting from town to town, and I had a routine. Every few days, I'd find a new small town, and trust me, this country has an endless supply of them, and I'd run the same con. I'd scope the town for an hour or two, looking for an elderly couple. Not just old, frail, slow-moving. The kind of people who'd hesitate before calling for help instead of acting fast. Once I found a house that felt right, I'd wait until it was dark enough to sell the story, but not so late that it looked suspicious. 9 o'clock was my sweet spot. Then I'd sprint up to their door in a panic, pounding and begging. My car broke down. My girlfriend's in labor at the hospital. I need a phone, please, right now. It worked every single time. Once they let me in, I'd tie them up, take whatever cash and jewelry I could find, and leave. I never touched anything that looked sentimental, and I never laid a hand on any of them. That was my one rule. Rob them, don't hurt them. I told myself that made me less of a monster. It didn't. Now that you know exactly what kind of person I was, let me tell you about the night that almost got me killed. It started exactly like all the others. I found a house at the edge of a nowhere town, the kind of place where the nearest neighbor was a 3-minute drive away, and I got into position a little after 9. The house sat right up against the road with barely a driveway. Just a beat-up pickup parked in the side yard. Behind it, nothing but trees for as far as I could see in the dark. I always studied the terrain before I made a move, because if something went wrong, I needed an exit already mapped out. This one looked easy. Open road in front, no obstacles. I actually felt good about it. I ran up to the door and started pounding, yelling for help. An old woman opened it. And here's the first thing that should have warned me. She didn't look scared. She didn't look surprised. She looked at me the way you'd look at a delivery driver, completely unbothered, and asked, real calm, what was wrong. I gave her the whole routine. Wife in labor, car dead, I need a phone. She smiled at me. It wasn't a kind smile. Half her teeth were missing, and the ones that were left didn't look right. She grabbed my arm, not gently, and pulled me inside. Something about how she moved put a cold feeling in my stomach that I couldn't explain. Normally the people I targeted were flustered, scrambling to help, tripping over themselves. This woman was calm in a way that felt rehearsed, like she'd done this before, except I was supposed to be the one who'd done this before. I remember thinking, even in that first 10 seconds, that something about her hallway looked wrong. There were no photographs on the walls, no family pictures, no wedding portrait, nothing you'd expect to see in an old farmhouse that had clearly been lived in for decades. Just bare walls and a long runner rug that looked like it had been recently cleaned, too recently, like someone had scrubbed it that same day. I didn't have time to think about why that detail mattered. I know now that it should have sent me running before I ever stepped past the threshold. She walked me into the front room and told me, in this sing-song voice, not to worry, that I'd be just fine. And that's when a man came through the doorway behind her. I'm not exaggerating when I say he had to duck slightly to get through. Somewhere north of 6.5 feet, built like a door frame himself, with a beard that stuck out a good 3 inches off his jaw. And he was holding a hunting rifle like it was an extension of his arm. He also wasn't old. 25, maybe 30 at most. That was the detail that broke my whole plan. I never work young, strong people into my scheme. They don't panic the way scared, isolated elderly people do. Young men ask questions. Young men check the driveway before they check their wallets. I had walked straight into something I didn't understand. In a house with only one door out, standing next to a woman who suddenly didn't feel harmless at all. I want you to understand what it's like to realize, in real time, that you badly misjudged a room. It's not a jolt. It's slower than that. It creeps up your spine one detail at a time. First the smile with too few teeth. Then the calm that didn't match the story I was selling. Then the size of that man in the doorway, and the way he held that rifle. Not like someone who'd grabbed it out of fear, but like someone who'd carried it 1,000 times before and felt naked without it. Every con artist has a moment where the con starts working on you instead of the other way around. This was mine. I glanced toward the door out of pure instinct, doing the math on distance, on how fast the old woman could move to block it, on whether that rifle was even loaded. None of it added up to anything good. End of part 1. Coming up, the woman starts screaming a name into the house. A second man limps out of the back room, and our storyteller realizes the smell in that house isn't body odor. It's something much, much worse. Stick around for part 2. Picking back up right where we left off. The giant of a man had just walked into the room with a rifle, and the old woman had already sized me up. She told me the big man was her son, and that he'd go check on my car. Before I could get a word out, she threw her head back and screamed a name, Earl, at the top of her lungs. She told me her husband Earl was in the other room, and he'd help me too. The son walked out the front door toward my car while she kept hollering for Earl. I felt the panic building. Her son would take about 4 seconds to realize my car wasn't broken down at all. And he had a rifle. Rushing outside past him didn't feel like an option anymore. A moment later, an old man limped into the room. He didn't say a word. He just stood there and stared at me, like he was waiting for permission to do something. The woman said something about helping me, and he mumbled back, low, something I couldn't make out. That's when the smell hit me. In all the panic of getting through the door, I hadn't noticed it, but now, standing in that room, it was overwhelming. Not sweat, not garbage. Something rotten and organic, and worse than anything I'd smelled before. My body understood the danger before my brain caught up. I needed to leave. Immediately, I started backing toward the door. The old man mirrored me, step for step, staying between me and the exit. The woman kept closing the distance too, asking in that same sugary voice where I thought I was going, if I still wanted their help. I lied and said I forgot something in my car. Both of them kept pace with me. When I got within about 6 feet of the door, I just bolted. The old man lunged and I felt his fingers brush my jacket, but adrenaline and 20 extra years on him got me through the door and out into the yard. And that's when I remembered the son. I'd forgotten about him completely in the chaos of getting free. I got to my car and saw all 4 tires flat on the ground. Not slowly leaking, slashed. Someone had done this while I was inside, in the span of maybe 90 seconds. I didn't have time to process it because I heard the old man's voice from the doorway, yelling that I was outside and that I couldn't have gotten far. I ran for the tree line. I know it sounds like something out of a bad movie, but standing on an open road with a family that had just tried to trap me felt like a worse idea than the dark woods. I sprinted in maybe 50 or 60 yards, dropped behind a wide trunk, and forced myself to stop breathing so loud. Heavy footfalls came through the brush toward me. I couldn't run, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but hold as still as a corpse. The footsteps got so close, I swear I could feel the ground shift. I turned my head an inch and saw the son's boots pass less than 2 feet from my face, the rifle swinging loose in his hand. He never looked down. I think the wind covering the sound of his own steps is the only reason he didn't hear my heartbeat, because I sure could. He walked on. I gave it a full minute before I even considered moving. In that minute, lying face down in wet leaves, I ran through every version of my life that had led me to that spot. Every choice, every town, every scared old couple I'd conned before that night, and I remember thinking with total clarity that if I died in those woods, not one person would ever come looking for me. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody knew my real name in that state. I'd made myself into a ghost long before that family ever had the chance to make me into one for real. When I finally crept back toward the road, I could see the old woman through the window, standing dead still, staring out at the tree line like she was waiting for something to come back out of it. She never looked toward the car. I did the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life, and somehow it worked. I got in my car, put it in neutral, and let it roll silently down the slope of the road on 4 dead tires until the rims were grinding on asphalt. Then I ditched it and ran the rest of the way back into town on foot. I got the car towed the next day and never told a single soul, not the tow driver, not the police, about that family. I didn't want anyone asking questions that might loop back to what I'd actually been doing out there that night. I still don't know exactly what I walked into. I know what I smelled. I know what I saw in that woman's face, and that man's blank stare. Whatever they were doing in that house, I have a feeling it was worse than anything I ever did to anyone. I've turned that night over in my head more times than I can count. There are pieces that still don't add up. Why the tires were slashed in under 2 minutes flat, when I never saw the son carrying a knife. Why the old woman never once looked toward the woods, like she already knew exactly where I'd gone and wasn't worried about it. Why that smell never left my clothes even after I burned them a week later. I don't have answers, and honestly, I stopped looking for them a long time ago. Some doors are better left shut. That night ended my little game for good. I didn't become a good person overnight. I want to be honest about that. But I never ran the con again, and I never went back to that stretch of road, even years later when curiosity got the better of me, and I looked it up on a map. The house doesn't show up on satellite view anymore. There's just trees. That's the last we'll hear from our first storyteller. Our next letter comes from someone who spent a year working nights at a shopping plaza, and who swears to this day that he wasn't alone in that building. Part 3 right now. I've never told this story in full before, because of how it makes me look. So bear with me. A while back I spent a little over a year working as the overnight security guard at a large outlet plaza in my hometown. I won't say where, for obvious reasons. For the first couple of months, I actually took the job seriously. Then the boredom set in. I'm a night owl by nature, and I don't much care for people. So on paper this was the perfect job. Watch some monitors, walk a loop through the plaza a few times a night, otherwise just exist in an empty building until sunrise. It got old fast. Up to that point in my life, I'd never been in real trouble. Never a record, barely a speeding ticket. But one slow night, flipping through the camera feeds, I noticed a back service door with no camera pointed at it at all. I have no idea how that oversight happened, but it planted an idea in my head. I should describe the layout, since it matters for what comes later. The plaza was built with a shared corridor running behind every storefront, connecting all the shops to the security office in the back. Even with the store's front gate locked, I had full access from behind. Once I found that first blind spot, I started hunting for more, walking my rounds, doing something obvious like a wave or a little dance in a spot I suspected was dead, then running back to the office to check the tape. If the camera didn't catch me, I logged the location. Eventually, I had a full list of blind spots. And once the novelty of just knowing them wore off, I started using them. First, it was small, a hat off a display rack, left in a box outside the service door, picked up the next morning on my drive home. When I checked the footage afterward, there was nothing. No trace of me at all. I convinced myself I'd found a perfect system, and for a long stretch, I used it. Sometimes it was a cheap shirt. Sometimes a pair of shoes worth real money. I was careful, methodical, never taking enough from one store to draw obvious attention. Looking back, I think part of me wanted to get caught. Not enough to stop, but enough that I started taking stupid risks, leaving items in the office overnight instead of stashing them right away, cutting it closer to sunrise than I needed to. Boredom does strange things to a person's judgment. When your entire existence for 8 hours a night is 4 gray hallways and a wall of monitors, you start looking for any kind of feeling at all, even a bad one. Stealing gave me that. For a while, it was enough. I'm laying all this out because you need the full picture for what happened next. One night on my usual walk, I heard something that stopped me cold. What sounded exactly like a kid laughing somewhere close by. I swept my flashlight around and saw nothing. The laughing kept going, along with what sounded like whispering just outside the edge of hearing. I called out for whoever it was to show themselves. Nothing. Just more laughing, more movement all around me, and absolutely nobody visible. I ran back to the office and pulled the footage. All it showed was me, waving a flashlight around and shouting at an empty store like a lunatic. I didn't call it in, because my plan, genius, in my head, was to catch these kids myself when they tried to sneak out. I knew every blind spot in that building. There was no way a couple of teenagers messing around after hours knew them too. I watched every camera feed for that store for the rest of the night. Nothing. At dawn, I walked the store floor myself. No broken locks, no forced entry, nothing out of place. I told myself my mind was playing tricks on me from the boredom and moved on. I had 2 nights off after that. When I came back, the guy finishing his shift said nothing unusual had happened while I was gone. That night, I decided to go back into that same store, partly to check for anything I'd missed, partly, if I'm honest, to help myself to a new pair of shoes. Around 3 in the morning, I was in the shoe aisle with a pair of sneakers in hand when something rushed past me close enough that I felt the air move. I froze. I called out, and the only answer was that same laughter, closer now, coming from everywhere and nowhere. I bolted out of the aisle, sneakers still in my hand, sweeping the flashlight like it was a weapon. Near the back corner of the store, I caught motion out of the corner of my eye, a small shape ducking around the end of an aisle, and then it turned and waved at me. I couldn't make out details, just a shadow, too far for my light to reach. I told it to stay put and ran toward it. I looked away for 1 second. When I looked back, it was gone. I kept moving through the store shouting, hearing that same laughter circling me the whole time. It wasn't just one voice either, now that I think back on it. There were at least 2, maybe 3, overlapping, like a handful of kids playing the same game of tag in the dark, completely unbothered by the grown man screaming and stumbling through the aisles. And then, clear as anything, cutting straight through the noise, a voice said my full name. Not a nickname. Not something a coworker might have called out. My actual full legal name, first and last, spoken in a flat, almost bored tone, like it was reading it off a list. That was it for me. I ran back to the office, footage totally forgotten, and it wasn't until I was sitting down that I realized I still had the sneakers clutched in my hand. I set them on the desk, told myself I'd return them in the morning, and pulled up the tape from that night. Same as before, nothing. Just me, sprinting around an empty store, screaming at shadows. Even the camera aimed straight down the aisle where I'd seen the shape showed nothing at all. My supervisor came in at sunrise, and I told her everything both nights. She reviewed the footage with me and saw exactly what I saw. Nothing except me acting unhinged. Then she noticed the sneakers on the desk. Several stores had reported missing inventory over the past few months, and between that and my footage of me running around screaming, she didn't need much more. I quit on the spot, thinking, for some reason, that walking away meant I couldn't be blamed for anything anymore. They investigated the missing inventory, not the intruder I swore I'd seen. Somehow I was never charged. To this day, I don't know if I imagined the whole thing out of boredom and guilt, or if something really was in that store with me. Here's the part that still bothers me most, though. Weeks later, long after I'd quit, I ran into a former coworker at a gas station. We got to talking, and he mentioned, almost as a joke, that the plaza had a reputation among the older staff. Something about a family that used to run one of the original stores back before it changed hands decades earlier. Kids who'd supposedly died in a fire in the space that later became that exact shoe store. He laughed when he said it, like it was just an urban legend employees passed around to scare the new hires. I didn't laugh. I never told him why. I'd never seen or heard anything like it before or since that year. All I know for certain is that I saw a shape, I heard it laugh, and I heard it say my name like it already knew exactly who I was. And no camera in that building ever caught so much as a shadow of it. Up next, a college student's harmless crush turns into obsessive stalking. And then, almost overnight, the roles reverse and he's the one being watched. Part 4 coming up. I want to say up front that I wasn't a bad person before this. I kept to myself, went to class, came home. I've always been socially awkward, never had much of a friend group, and honestly it never bothered me. That was just my normal. Then one semester I got paired up with a girl for a class project. I'll call her Claire. She was easy to talk to, the kind of person who made a boring group project feel almost fun. The first time we met at the library to plan things out, I noticed I was paying more attention to her than the assignment, the way she talked, the way she wrote notes in the margins. I had a thing for her within the hour. We swapped numbers to coordinate on the project, and that should have been the end of my involvement in her life outside of class. It wasn't. That night I looked her up. Once I had her number saved, her name populated automatically through my contacts, and from there her social media took about 5 minutes to find. I told myself it was harmless curiosity. In reality, I was infatuated, and this was close to the only real interaction with a girl I'd had in a long time. I went through her photos, where she went, who she hung out with, little details in the backgrounds I started piecing together like clues. Checking her accounts became part of my daily routine. Within a few days, I had a rough idea of her neighborhood. Then I looked up how to find someone's home address using just a name and number, and I learned it's disturbingly easy. I drove past her house once. Then I circled back and slowed down in front of it. A light was on upstairs, and I wondered if it was her room. There was a car out front with a parking permit for our school on the window, which I took as confirmation. I should have stopped there. Instead, I got hooked. I started driving past a couple of nights a week, always staying in the car. Always telling myself I hadn't crossed a line, even though I obviously had. I told myself all kinds of things during those drives. That I was just making sure she was safe. That I wasn't really doing anything, just sitting in a parked car on a public street. It's incredible what you can talk yourself into when the alternative is admitting you become someone you don't recognize. One night, parked a little further down the block than usual, I saw the blind shift in that upstairs window. Someone was looking out, right at the street. I couldn't tell if it was her, but it didn't matter. I panicked, convinced myself I'd been made, and left immediately, probably making myself look even more suspicious in the process. I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole drive home. The next day in class, Claire seemed completely normal, until she mentioned, almost in passing, that some of the guys at school could be creepy, and that she was actually dealing with a stalker situation of her own. She said it lightly, like it was gossip rather than something serious, but I felt every drop of blood leave my face. I sat there nodding along, trying to look appropriately sympathetic, while running through every single thing I'd done over the past 2 weeks and wondering exactly how much of it she already knew about. I didn't dare ask her to elaborate. I was too afraid to hear that she meant me. After that, I stopped driving past her house. I stopped checking her profiles as much too, convinced she was onto me, and terrified of pushing my luck. This is where things got strange in a way I never expected. I live alone in my grandparents' old house, which passed down to me after my parents died. One night around 9, I was in my room and heard a light tap against my window. Not a knock, more like something brushing against the glass, like someone leaning in close to look inside. I was too scared to go check. The next night it happened again, from a completely different side of the house. That's when I knew it wasn't the wind or my imagination. It kept escalating, shapes moving past the blinds, never clear enough to identify, just enough to know someone, or multiple someones, were circling my house at night. I stopped opening the blinds entirely. I locked my door, kept the lights off, and basically stopped leaving my room except when I had to. I skipped class for days, and had food delivered so I wouldn't have to go outside. Every sound made me think someone was standing right outside the door. During all this, Claire texted me, worried, asking why I had vanished from class and stopped responding about the project. Eventually I answered, and in a moment of panic, I asked her to please stop sending people to my house. I regretted it the second I hit send. Her reply took a few minutes. I watched the typing bubble appear and disappear over and over. When it finally came through, she sounded completely confused, asking what on earth I was talking about. That's when it actually hit me. She probably had nothing to do with any of this. I told her I must have sent the message to the wrong person, and thankfully she let it go. But the damage in my own head was already done. The worst night came not long after. I was sitting in the dark on my bed when the doorbell rang out of nowhere and nearly stopped my heart. I crept downstairs, lights still off, and stood by the door listening without opening it. Whoever was on the other side heard me anyway, because they told me, not asked, told me, to open the door. When I said I hadn't ordered anything, their tone got sharper, more demanding. I didn't answer. I backed away, went upstairs, and locked myself in my room while they leaned on the doorbell for a solid minute straight. I sat there hiding like a coward until it finally stopped. I stayed at my parents' old place for almost a week after that, without telling anyone the real reason. Things with Claire stayed awkward through the rest of the project, and I never did find out who came to my house that night, or if she had anything to do with it at all. I've thought about it a lot since then. Maybe it really was her family, tipped off somehow, giving me a taste of exactly what I'd put her through. Maybe it was something else entirely, completely unrelated, and the timing was just a horrible coincidence. I've never been able to decide which possibility scares me more. Whoever it was never came back after that week away. I never went near her house or her profiles again. I got exactly what I deserved, and I never want that feeling again. Our final letter is the longest one we've received, and it's split into 2 parts. It starts with someone who found a strange kind of thrill in walking through strangers' empty homes, and ends with that same person becoming the one who's watched. Part 5, next. A couple of years ago I was, for lack of a better phrase, completely lost. No direction, no real relationships, cycling through dead-end jobs, and just moving through life on autopilot. Something was missing, and I tried filling it with all the usual empty fixes. None of it stuck, until, almost by accident, I found something that did. I trespassed into a neighbor's house. I know exactly how that sounds. Here's how it happened. I knew this particular couple casually, and I knew they both worked full days. That morning a small construction crew had shown up to do some renovation work at their place, and I happened to see them all leave together for lunch while I was out walking. Something took over and I walked up to the front door, tried the handle, and it opened. I let myself in and just walked through their house. Living room, kitchen, upstairs hallway, a full, quiet tour of someone else's private life. I remember running my hand along the banister on the way up the stairs, noticing the family photos lining the wall, little details about people I only knew well enough to wave to at the mailbox. There was a school portrait of their daughter on the fridge, held up with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. I stood in their kitchen for a long moment just looking at it, feeling something I still don't have a clean word for. The rush of being somewhere I absolutely wasn't supposed to be was unlike anything I'd felt in years. I stayed maybe 10 minutes, then left well before the crew came back. After that first time, I couldn't stop. I started breaking into homes I knew for a fact were empty, purely for the thrill of it. I never stole a single item. I'd just walk the rooms, look at how people lived, stand in someone's kitchen or bedroom knowing they had no idea I was there. That feeling was addictive in a way I can't fully explain. And like every other fix I chased in my life, it eventually stopped being enough. The eerie rush of just being inside wore off. So I escalated. I started calling myself, in my own head, a reverse thief. Instead of taking something, I'd leave something behind. Something small, something that made no sense, and then I'd imagine, in detail, the conversation it would spark once the owners found it. One of my early ones, I left a folded blanket, one I'd brought with me, sitting on a couple's living room couch. Not theirs. Mine. The idea of them finding it, and trying to figure out where it came from made me almost giddy, like a kid on Christmas morning. Looking back now, I understand exactly how disturbed that is. If I ever walked into my own home and found something like that waiting for me, I'd be calling the police within the minute. But at the time, this became my entire life. I'd structured my whole week around it, watching people's routines, learning their schedules, scouting for weak points into their homes. You would not believe how many people leave a key under the mat or tucked inside one of those fake decorative rocks. It didn't take long before I turned into something genuinely dangerous. I'll give you one example that shows how far I'd gone. I once planted a bright pink hair tie and an eyeshadow pencil in a stranger's bathroom, then hid in the bushes outside to watch the couple come home and discover it. I needed to actually witness the fallout. The wife got home first and was immediately furious. Her husband arrived a little later, had absolutely no idea what she was talking about, and the two of them ended up in a full-blown fight right there in the driveway, all because of something I planted. I loved every second of it. I'd become this small, cruel presence in other people's lives, and I genuinely enjoyed it. I got bolder after that. I started keeping a mental list of houses in rotation, almost like a route. I learned which families left for vacation on which weeks, by watching for stopped mail and darkened porch lights. I learned which teenagers left windows cracked for late-night smoking breaks. I built an entire secret map of my own neighborhood that nobody else could see, and I walked it like I owned every square foot of it. It was only a matter of time before someone made sure I understood exactly how that felt from the other side. Our storyteller thought he was the one in control, until he came home one afternoon to find something waiting for him on his own kitchen counter. What happens next is the most unsettling part of tonight's stories, and it's coming up right now in our final chapter. One afternoon I got home from work and something on my kitchen counter stopped me in my tracks. A small glass vase with a single yellow flower in it, something that absolutely had not been there when I left that morning. Next to it sat a folded note, written in neat cursive. "We know it was you." I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. I checked every window and door. Everything was still locked. I couldn't think of a single person who could have gotten in, and I'd always been meticulous about not leaving a trail behind me. That night I locked myself in my bedroom, and going to the police wasn't an option. If whoever left that note actually knew what I'd been doing, calling the cops would only invite the kind of attention that could end my life as I knew it. I genuinely considered going back to my parents' place, but I didn't want to deal with the questions that would come with it. Instead, I stayed up most of the night thinking it over and decided, for real this time, that my reverse thief game was over. The next morning, nothing new waited for me, and I let myself breathe a little. But when I got back from running errands that afternoon, my luck ran out. On the counter again, another note, this time next to a dead bird. It read, "We're coming for you." I went straight to my room to pack a bag, planning to stay with my parents until I figured out what to do. As I grabbed my things, I heard a shuffling sound, not from inside my room, but from somewhere below. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the floor vent and heard movement coming from the basement. Someone or something was down there. I could make out muffled voices, though I couldn't understand a word of what they were saying. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed for what felt like a full minute before I could make myself move again. Every horror movie cliche I'd ever rolled my eyes at suddenly felt completely reasonable. Don't go check the noise. Just leave. Just get out of the house. And for once in my life, I actually listened to that instinct. I moved as quietly as I could toward the front door, every step feeling deafeningly loud in my own ears. The front door sat right next to the basement door, and curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know exactly who had been in my house. I opened the basement door and heard the voices again, clearer now. Definitely voices, definitely. More than one person. The second I put my foot on the first creaky step, someone below hissed a sharp, "Chh!" I called down into the dark. No response. I knew for a fact there had been voices seconds earlier. I wasn't about to go down there alone to confront more than one person. I slammed the door shut, backed out of my own house, and drove off, checking my mirrors the whole way to see if anyone followed. Nobody did. I told my parents I needed to stay with them for a week because of plumbing issues at my place. A total lie, and I spent that week jumping at every creak in their house too. After a full week with no new notes or gifts, I decided it was safe enough to go back and pack up properly. While I was staying with my parents, I'd also called my landlord and gotten out of my lease a month early, planning to use that time to move everything out for good, just in case my unwelcome visitors came back. When I got back to the house, the front door was standing wide open, and I knew for certain I had locked it before leaving. Inside, more presents waited on the counter. Another dead bird, a fresh handful of yellow flowers, and a small toy car that looked exactly like the one I actually drove. I checked the vent again. Silence. I opened the basement door and shouted down into it. Still nothing. I grabbed a kitchen knife just in case and went down myself this time. Empty. For one brief moment, I actually felt relief. and told myself maybe whoever it was figured I'd already left for good and had backed off. I wasn't willing to bet on that theory though. I grabbed only the essentials and headed back to my car, planning to finish moving out slowly over the coming weeks rather than risk another night there. As I backed out of the driveway, I noticed something across the street, an older couple standing on the sidewalk, watching my house. Not elderly, more like their 50s or 60s. I'd never seen either of them before in my life. As I pulled away, the woman raised her hand and waved at me, and I saw exactly what she was holding. A single small yellow flower, identical to the ones left in my kitchen. The man beside her didn't move a muscle. He just watched. I didn't wave back. I hit the gas and got out of there, checking my mirror once as I turned the corner and seeing both of them still standing in the exact same spot, still watching the direction I'd gone. I took a long way back to my parents' house just in case, and I never spotted them following me. But something in me broke that day. For weeks afterward, I was jumpy at every sound, suspicious of every stranger who got too close. That was the day my reverse thief phase ended for good, and I mean for good. To this day I've never been caught for anything I did. But what still keeps me up some nights isn't the fear of getting caught. It's that I never found out who broke into my home, who left those notes, or who that older couple actually was. If it really was them, I have no idea what their connection to any of it could have been. I moved out of that house within the month, and I've never gone back, not even to drive past it. I changed my routine completely. No more late night walks, no more mental maps of my neighbors' schedules. I got a dog mostly so the silence in a new place wouldn't feel so much like an invitation. Every so often, usually late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that couple standing across the street with the yellow flower. I run through every possibility. Maybe they were a random pair of neighbors who happened to be out for an evening walk at the worst possible moment, and the flower was nothing, a coincidence my paranoid brain turned into a threat. Or maybe they were exactly what they looked like, two people who had figured out precisely what I'd been doing, and who had decided, in their own quiet way, to make sure I knew that somebody was always watching back. The only thing I know for certain is that whatever you put out into the world eventually finds its way back to you, one way or another. That closes out tonight's 4 stories. If any of these hit a little too close to home, that's exactly the point. The people telling them never expected to end up on the other side of the fear they caused. Thanks for listening all the way through.